Scrambled Eggs is a silly name for an arc, but it suits these chapters of Quintessential Quintuplets. The Nakano sisters are the eggs, fresh off the success of the final exams, and they are scrambling to cope with their feelings while getting mixed up in the hardest quintuplet game to date. It's actually very similar to the Bonfire arc. Both of these arcs use the wedding as a framing device, involve a quintuplet disguising herself as one of her sisters in order to test Fuutarou, feature an urban legend that ultimately becomes true, push all 6 characters forward, are similar in length, and would make for excellent season finales. The Bonfire arc ended with chapter 32, and Scrambled Eggs ended 36 chapters later. So the fact that this arc was shaved down to 1.5 episodes and was not the finale is a major reason why season 2 was a disappointment. But this isn't a breakdown of the anime. If it was, it would be a lot shorter. This is a breakdown of the manga, and woo boy, is there a lot to unpack here. So much so that I have to go character to character just to keep the script from getting scrambled itself. No matter how much you love every single character in an arc, there is always going to be a least relevant quint. And for this arc, it is Yotsuba. At face value, she is the one with the simplest problem. They all intend to dress up like Itsuki to appease their grandfather, and she isn't sure she can do it. The manga has always been consistent in how much Yotsuba stands out. Her ribbon makes her easier to spot, her sense of fashion pops more, her athleticism allows her to do things none of the other quints can, and she is by far the worst at disguises. During the quintuplet game of chapter 64, she's the most quiet. She's sure that as soon as she starts talking, Fuutarou will know it's her since she has the most unique verbiage and is the worst at replicating Itsuki. As the last one Fuutarou interviews, she ends up being the one to explain the situation. They used to all dress and act identical, and their grandfather was happy. But then one day, Yotsuba broke the mold. She started wearing her ribbon, and their grandfather was upset. So now anytime they see their grandfather, they all dress and act the same again, putting on an act to appease him. What Yotsuba is too dense to realize is that it wasn't the change that upset him. It was Yotsuba's attitude about that change. Their grandfather was able to pick up on those changes in her attitude and likely saw her belittling the other girls, and that's what upset him. Even though he is appreciating the effort, he can probably tell that something is bothering them still, which explains his attitude towards Fuutarou and how he goes from slamming him to the ground to giving him an important mission by the end of this arc. While explaining all of this, Yotsuba gives herself up and admits that the stress of acting like Itsuki has been bothering her. Later in the chapter, we see her practicing her Itsuki by complaining about being hungry, which is just adorable, and then she doesn't get anything else to do until her scene with Ichika. She has no idea about any of the drama going on with her or Nino. All she sees is someone crying. Someone who desperately wants to be heard. And Yotsuba just can't ignore someone in need. Especially when it's the older sister she admires so much and who came to her when she needed it most. She's pushing herself too much. She's trying to go in 2 directions that contradict each other. Yotsuba recalls their past and how Ichika would take everything from her. Ichika doesn't remember this because it wasn't important to her, but it was important to Yotsuba. One day, Ichika stole a boy that Yotsuba had just made friends with, and that was when Yotsuba started wearing the ribbon. Even though she doesn't come out and say it, she's asking Ichika the same thing Fuutarou asked her during the Labor Thanksgiving Day arc. She's done so much for everyone else, but not herself. What does she want? What does she truly want? Ichika of the past was always willing to take what she wanted from others. Yotsuba wants a little bit of that bossy big sister back. It isn't fair that Ichika is the only one holding back. But Yotsuba is saying this without knowing the situation or what Ichika would be willing to do if she retires her nurturing role. In the final chapter of this arc, Yotsuba talks to Raiha about their vacation and gives this blush when Raiha mentions a swing. She once again expresses her desire to make Raiha her little sister, even if she has to commit crimes to do it. And in the end, Yotsuba was able to let go of some of her worries, which she will continue to do for the remainder of the story. But not before her actions here lead to undesirable outcomes she was too blinded by love to see. Nino wasn't expected to see Fuutarou during the trip, but unlike him, she is ready to take advantage of that situation. She's the only one that actively approaches him and even calls him by his first name for the first time in the series. Subtlety is a lost concept to Nino, and it's what makes her stand out most amongst the five. It becomes more relevant when we get to the Sister War arc, but Nino is no coward. She is the opposite of Miku and even detests her weakness. She wants to win Fuutarou's heart and she wants to win it fair and square. For her to do that, she's going to have to force Miku to grow a spine. In chapter 63, she does one of the boldest things in the series when she follows Fuutarou into the bath. She even notes how often it happens. There was that first time early on, her revenge during the midterms, Fuutarou walking around in a towel during 7 goodbyes, and now this. Nino offers to wash his back and gets really close because she is only thinking with her hormones. But when Fuutarou asks who she is, it snaps her back to reality. He doesn't see her that way. He doesn't love her. And the fact he only knows that she isn't Itsuki makes her think that he recognizes Itsuki first, which would mean he loves Itsuki more, which is why during the last festival Nino is adamant that Itsuki is likely to get chosen. She gets pissy and storms off with all her hormones and courage having been deflated like a wet balloon. Because of this, it is certainly Nino that uses this opportunity to test Fuutarou. There are 4 more Itsukis than there used to be, and it's up to Fuutarou to find out which one is which. After some detective work I'll lay out later, I've determined that Nino is the Itsuki that decides to challenge him. She was pissed that he couldn't tell it was her, and she's the one who introduced the concept of the quintuplet game back during the bonfire arc. As they part ways, Nino invites Ichika for a bath, figuring that Ichika is the most knowledgeable and trustworthy to help her with her issues. She really butters her sister up before revealing her true intention. The truth is, she is under the impression that Ichika gets confessed to all the time, which is probably not inaccurate, but also not super helpful to Nino's situation, especially since Ichika is already aware of what happened and is probably the last person Nino would want to confide in if she knew the truth. Nino is open and honest about her feelings. She hated this guy, but came to realize she actually hated the role he played, and then once she embraced change, she came to admire and love the impact he had on their family. She is even emphatically clear that unlike Fuutarou and Miku at the start of this arc, that this is about her. Even so, she doesn't want to admit who it is. It's just too embarrassing for her right now. She asks her if someone were to confess to her, would she become conscious of that person? We already know from the opening chapter of this arc that the answer in this case is yes. She listens and even agrees with Ichika's assessment that the confession was too impulsive, but she isn't going to give up. She loves him and is willing to do anything to make herself happy with these feelings. Even if it means trampling over someone else, even if it means trampling over one of her beloved sisters. She is a freight train of love that's moving full steam ahead. After giving it some thought, Nino decides that she is going to kiss him, and not just anywhere but under the fabled bell at the resort. She also tries to pressure Ichika into helping her practice, which, have I mentioned that Nino has a dirty idea of what actresses do? All the girls show up as Fuutarou and the grandpa are fishing, and she gets intrigued by a particular fish called a silago, which in Japanese sounds like the word for kissing, but she decides not to kiss him since she's in her Itsuki guise. She then gets irritated on how many restrictions they have when it comes to Fuutarou. Ichika once again tries talking her out of it, telling her to be patient, but Nino is determined to do it here because of the bell. To that end, Nino asks Ichika to help her make that happen. She leaves a letter in Fuutarou's room and waits under the bell, but Fuutarou doesn't come. Their father, on the other hand, does, which means that Ichika betrayed her. In the final chapter of the arc, she expresses frustration at being had. She knew about Miku, but with Ichika involved, she can no longer take her time. Not that she was going to anyway. She questions Itsuki, who gives her the answer she was suspecting, which is the truth, but is also a lie by omission. Itsuki does have a secret, and that secret is going to pit Nino against her sisters by the end of the story, but more importantly, Nino has resolved herself. If Miku is going to be a wimp and Ichika a snake, it's in her best interest to move full steam ahead before they can sabotage her again. Itsuki has given small nudges of support here and there, but this is the first arc where that is the entirety of her role. She's noticed the changes in her sister's attitude and enlists Fuutarou's help to get to the bottom of it. At first read, her reason for coming to Fuutarou instead of just asking is anyone's guess. But with how many times I've read this, there's clearly something else going on. There's always something else going on with Itsuki. She's the one Quint who never dominates a major arc, but in every major arc, she's there acting of her own will to achieve something more important than anyone else. Here she is put in a position where she can't trust her sisters. They're all putting on an act for their grandfather, and all of them are likely to deny any ill feelings around each other. That's why Itsuki needs Fuutarou, someone who she considers a friend but who is still distant enough from the family to get each girl to open up. Maruo manages to keep the families apart, but not before Itsuki tells Fuutarou to meet up with her. She calls Raiha the next day after Fuutarou failed to reach the courtyard. She then goes into the women's bath to talk to Fuutarou through the wall separating the women's bath from the mixed bath. Now, I have a whole section dedicated to this in a future part, but I adore how Neji handles fan service, especially in this arc. This is some top quality eye candy, but it is only icing on the cake. The cake in this instance being their conversation. She gets filled in on what happens and reaches the same conclusion he did. She also starts to tell him about what they do for their grandfather, but then Nino interrupts. Itsuki is thrown completely for a loop by this. She was still under the impression that Nino hated him. She didn't hear Nino getting more casual with him earlier. Even if she had, as we'll see later on, she is way slower on the uptake than any of her sisters. She chastises him for upsetting Nino. Then she reiterates the theory that love is the only way to see through all their disguises, which was first brought up shortly after the bonfire arc and gets expanded with a far better explanation later in this arc. Itsuki then asks why Nino would do that, but Fuutarou doesn't give her an answer for now. She finally gets to what she originally wanted to talk about. All of her sisters have been acting strange and she needs Fuutarou to help her figure this out. Might be a family thing, but it's something she believes only he can do as their friend. This is the first time she's called him a friend. Before this, they were partners. In this respect, she actually agrees with the fake Itsuki. She might not know what her sister's intentions are, or even which of the sisters it is, but they have gone through far too much together to be mere acquaintances. After he agrees, Itsuki takes a page from Nino's book and goes into the bath with him. She thinks this is what friends would do. She may or may not also have the hots for him, and if she does, she almost certainly doesn't even realize it. She's just acting impulsive because her entire arc centers around her emulating people she admires, and if both Fuutarou and Nino have run into each other in the bath, then why shouldn't she? It doesn't take her long to come to her senses, and I love how Neji draws the Quints when they are acting crazy. He always adds these swirl patterns to show that they're not thinking straight and are being purposely manipulative rather than genuine. Itsuki then tells him to forget about it and listens to his plan to catch the fake Itsuki. Itsuki herself doesn't end up telling him about their deal with their grandpa and lets him go in blind and figure things out for himself, which tracks with how she handles tough situations all throughout the series. In chapter 66, she openly denies the possibility of anyone sneaking out to see Fuutarou while secretly acknowledging the possibility. She was the one who figured that something was off about everyone after all. She then invites Miku to the hot springs so they can have their moment. They briefly run into Fuutarou and their grandpa, showcasing his inability to figure things out himself. Itsuki berates the idea that he's treating this like any other exam where the answers are all clearly spelled out in a book. When Itsuki sees Miku's leg, she realizes that she was the fake Itsuki Fuutarou was talking about. She questions Miku and confirms her original suspicion that this was all a way to express her desire to change the nature of their relationship. And something only Itsuki knows is that this isn't the first time someone used her guise to express themselves to Fuutarou. Itsuki is shocked that Miku is in love with Fuutarou, which says more about her density than it does anything else. Miku never exactly hid it from her sisters the way she hid it from Fuutarou. But as much as this is a story about a man understanding the feelings of 5 sisters, it's also a story about those sisters discovering themselves and each other. Itsuki hadn't spent much time with Miku in this story. She was only aware of Yotsuba's feelings due to specific circumstances. She's a lot like Fuutarou, where she is less oblivious and more against the idea to begin with. Because of that, she couldn't understand any of her sister's feelings or why they had been acting weird. And now that she's been made aware of those feelings, she starts piecing things together and figures out just how deep these emotions go. And so, in her own way, she pushes Miku to force Fuutarou's hand. She asks him to meet one last time before the trip ends. In the final chapter, she hides the truth about her prior actions from Nino. It's possible that due to Nino's words, she's beginning to suspect that Nino has gotten herself in sibling rivalry. She's missing some key information to put those puzzle pieces together, though. But what she does know is that Yotsuba has a history with Fuutarou that she's been trying to bury, and that's something Itsuki can't share with anybody because it's not her secret to tell. In this arc, Ichika continues dealing with her growing internal conflict as well as a growing sense of desperation. By the end of the final exams, she was content with taking her time so long as things stayed the same. And she managed to clam jam Miku by having a higher total score. Biding her time is no longer an option. She knows Nino confessed and she has to make a decision based on that. During the quintuplet game, Ichika is most likely the most straightforward one. She is then invited to a bath by Nino and the two talk about boys. Nino reveals what Ichika already secretly knew. She found a boy she likes and it happens to be the same boy that Ichika likes. Ichika knows more than what she has let on and far more about Nino than what Nino knows about her. During the entire conversation, she is internally screaming. They both want Fuutarou all to themselves and just are not capable of dealing with the person they love so much coming between the equally strong love they have for each other. Especially since Ichika is all too aware of Nino's dedication to her family. This is a worst case scenario for her. She was already having a hard time knowing Miku feels the same, and now just when she thought she was victorious and deserving, Nino cut her off. Nino is blunt and honest in a way that Ichika could only dream of being. Ichika tries to dissuade her. She claims confessing isn't enough, and when that doesn't get the desired reaction, Ichika questions Nino's feelings. If it was such a disaster when they first met, how can she be sure her feelings are real? Nino is acting too brash and impulsive. She hasn't thought about anyone but herself, and so Ichika tries using her own weakness and one she believes will be Nino's weakness as well. What if someone else likes him, and has liked him longer? She's referring to herself and Miku. Nino is aware of Miku's feelings, and Ichika likely knows this, so she doesn't even have to name drop Miku to let it settle in. In fact, name-dropping Miku would reveal that Ichika already knows which boy Nino has fallen for. It was a perfectly executed ploy that got Nino to think, but it failed to produce the result Ichika wanted. Nino is unstoppable. She even tries using Ichika as kissing practice, and I like to think that Ichika saying that them being sisters makes it not okay is both referring to the kiss and this pentagonal prism of love. While Fuutarou and the grandpa are fishing, Ichika gets super stressed when she realizes that Nino is contemplating kissing him because of the name of a fish. She then hurts her ankle in the water and is caught by Fuutarou. She's been feeling clumsy because she hurt her leg earlier, and upon hearing this, Fuutarou dries her off and demands to know which one she is. She has no idea about any of the fake Itsuki stuff, and if she did, she wouldn't have openly admitted to hurting her leg like that. She holds Fuutarou deep into her boobs to keep him quiet as someone, probably Nino, approaches. As she holds him, she once again laments her own feelings and ponders if it'll be okay to forget about all of that while disguised as Itsuki and steal Fuutarou's first kiss for herself. Nino then gives Ichika a task, and one that'll make or break their rivalry. Nino wants her to stay on lookout while she meets up with Fuutarou under the bell. Nino isn't underhanded. She is going to win if Ichika complies, but if Ichika doesn't, then Nino will know where Ichika really stands and a wedge will be driven between them. It's here that Yotsuba shows back up in the arc. They go to their secret spot on the roof where their dad won't find them. But this also means Ichika won't be able to help Nino. She is being wishy-washy and the exact opposite of Nino and Miku, who are both firm in their beliefs. After Yotsuba sees right through her fake smile, they reminisce about the past. Ichika was the ringleader in their mischief back when they were truly identical. Ichika plays dumb, but she actually realized that Fuutarou was the kid from Kyoto back when she saw him in a blonde wig. And because of the way Yotsuba plays it off, it makes Ichika question whether Yotsuba remembers all the details of that day. Fuutarou certainly doesn't, even if it did have a profound impact on him. Ichika changed after their mom died. She saw how everyone, especially Itsuki, was depressed, and she took it upon herself to make everyone happy. She was always only the oldest by a few minutes, but taking on such a maternal role made her grow up. She was the first to adopt an adult sense of fashion. She was the first one to get a job, and almost every major decision she has made in the series reflects that. She was initially dismissive of Fuutarou, but not antagonistic because she knew the girls needed him. She encouraged Miku, advised Fuutarou, checked Nino, nurtured Yotsuba, and coddled Itsuki, all to this end. But is that all there is to her? Is that the real Ichika, or is it just another role she took? What does she want? She takes Yotsuba's prodding to heart and hardens her resolve. She's going to do exactly what Nino is. She's going to take what she wants no matter who she has to step on to get it. The reason she didn't want things to change is because she didn't want anyone to have Fuutarou. And as her first act in the selfish chapter of her life, she takes back the coat she had lent to Yotsuba and ignores Nino's wishes to have her stall their father. The red herring that was planted earlier is resolved when Yotsuba reminds Ichika of her sprained ankle and how she got it. In the final chapter of the arc, Ichika competes with Miku to see who can last longer in the sauna. Ichika initially gives up, but joins back in when Miku admits how frustrated she was with their scores in the final exam, which is the perfect little microcosm for Ichika in this part of the story. Not only that, but her thoughts betray something interesting. She wasn't able to see how much it frustrated Miku because Miku was expressionless, but love is supposed to see through everything. Itsuki was able to tell something was bothering Miku. Even Fuutarou was able to pick up on that. Whether Ichika had or not is irrelevant. She has closed her heart to any pain she might cause Miku going forward. As she shares one last laugh of love with Miku, she prepares herself to win at all costs, even if she has to trample over Miku to do it. Miku is the biggest driving force of this arc. Not only is she the fake Itsuki, but the entire trip was her idea. We're never told if she conspired with her grandfather to get both groups on the vacation, but it is awfully suspicious to me that everything involving the circumstances of this trip seemed to benefit her and her goals specifically. Even in her first appearance for the arc, she is notably up to something. She plays it off and Fuutarou doesn't give it much thought, but she went out of her way to make sure she was near the same area where Fuutarou would most likely do his shopping. It could have been just a chance encounter, but the way Miku talks says otherwise. She planned this, and may very well have been lurking in the area ever since their break began, all to get closer to Fuutarou and initiate the next stage in her plan. The next stage in this plan is to fill out a raffle where the prize is a trip to a resort that her grandfather just happens to live near. Fuutarou is more interested in the lesser prizes like gift vouchers, but fate is on the side of the Quints. After Miku brings up Nino, Fuutarou asks if she said anything. Miku has no idea about the confession and doesn't know Nino has fallen for him. He confides in her with the old friend excuse, which doesn't really work. But because Miku is only aware of Ichika's feelings, she assumes that Ichika once again beat her to the punch. After all, Ichika was the only one who knew Miku's plan to confess if she had the highest grade, so it makes sense that Ichika would do the same. She does tease him about thinking about love since it's something that would be out of character for him, and it shows that he is much more like a normal person now than when they met. She is, however, glad that the someone who she totally doesn't know didn't reject her outright. And with that little confidence, she does the same asking for a friend lie to confide her own feelings. She's scared to confess because to confess means that you are no longer satisfied with how things are and want things to change. But change can sometimes hurt. She wants Fuutarou all to herself, but confessing now might make him hate her or drive a wedge between her and Ichika. But knowing now that someone confessed to him already, she can't help but put herself down again. She was always the most apathetic of the Quints, the one with the least amount of confidence, the one who said she was the biggest loser of the 5 back in chapter 4, and she's lost again. She couldn't confess earlier, and now one of her sisters has beaten her to the punch. That same sister is the first thing that catches her off guard in this arc. For the next few arcs, she is unable to comprehend why Nino's attitude changed so abruptly. For someone who is already struggling to find a strategy, the possibility of fighting on 2 separate fronts is terrifying. Miku tries her best to muster something up, only to have it, like her confession, stolen from her by someone who is aware of her feelings and is determined to tear her down. Miku does manage to separate Nino from Fuutarou in a less than graceful way, and then she meets up with Fuutarou, who was expecting the real Itsuki. She, as Itsuki, asks where they stand. Itsuki once called him a partner, so that's the answer he gives.
If you think very hard about this, you should already know the answer.
Starting today, I'm your partner.
Miku's plan is to change that. She wants to end that relationship and replace it with something greater, because that's what it means to confess. It takes courage to be willing to change a relationship. She is the best at imitating Itsuki during the quintuplet game, nailing Itsuki's sensitivity. She then confronts Fuutarou, and even though she gives him hints, like covering her eye and ghosting her headphones, she's still the last one he guesses. And then she explains why their father was able to come along. In chapter 66, she suggests that the others snuck out to meet Fuutarou. She knows Ichika's intentions and may have begun suspecting Nino at this point as well. She goes to the hot spring with Itsuki and laments that 6 months just isn't enough time for Fuutarou to figure things out on his own. As she explains her actions to Itsuki, she starts making excuses for herself but fights back that cowardly impulse in order to be more honest with her sister. After conveying her feelings to Itsuki, she agrees to test Fuutarou one last time. She listens to his reasoning and the various things he's discovered as he deduces her identity. But when it comes to deciding whether she is Miku or Ichika, he gets stumped. Her fears are once again being justified, and she doesn't make it easy for him. She loves him and wants him to reciprocate those feelings. Giving him hints would deny her that satisfaction. Fuutarou's attempts at goading her become increasingly pathetic. She mentally demands he just give up and let her sulk in defeat. The more he tries, the more it's just setting her up for disappointment. So she slips, but not as Miku. She says something Ichika would say. She plays along as Ichika just to get the miserable experience over with. She was right. Fuutarou just isn't capable of sharing those feelings. She gives him nothing else to go on and walks away. She can't even face him as tears swell up in her eyes and something clicks in Fuutarou's mind.
Miku.
He calls out to Miku, and even though he can't explain it, she can. He succeeded. Itsuki was right. He might not be fully there yet, but he does have the capacity to love them. With that, she accepts that they are teacher and student, and though that might not change, it doesn't mean other things won't change. In the final chapter at the end of her sauna battle with Ichika, she admits defeat for the final exams. But no matter how frustrating that is, she can't give up. She's going to start looking for that thing that'll make Fuutarou fall for her. Fuutarou gets a lot more to do than usual in this arc. While his main priority is finding the identity of the fake Itsuki, his original goal was to just enjoy his vacation. And by enjoy, I mean study, which he is even more eager to get to now that his average scores have declined for the first time ever. Fuutarou is beyond tired and can't even appreciate Raiha's cooking the way he usually does. His grades slipped, and on top of that, he needs to take advantage of his time away from the girls in order to cope with the fact that Nino confessed to him. Isanari and Raiha can both tell that something is wrong with him, even if the changes in his actions are subtle. This could very well be the Uesugi version of the ongoing theme that love lets you see through lies. Raiha does manage to get him outside to do some shopping, and on the way he is forced to think about Nino even more as a couple declare love for each other. Love is the one thing he can't escape, no matter how much he would rather focus on his grades. This is when he runs into Miku and gives her a little insight into his problem. He asks her if Nino said anything to her, and when the question confuses her, he drops that line of questioning in favor of asking her if she likes anyone, which causes her to freak out and lie. Fuutarou seemingly buys her excuse, since she was pretty confident in saying she doesn't like anyone back when she still didn't like him, which seems like so very long ago now. After talking a bit about Nino without actually giving a single detail or a hint that he's talking about himself, Miku opens up in similar fashion. Fuutarou is already feeling the truth of what Miku says about the fear and courage inherent in a confession. He no longer has any idea how he will react around Nino, or what to do about it. And of course he complains about actually winning the family trip, but with no way out of it, he resolves himself to enjoy it and enjoy the time away from the girls who are also there, along with Maruo. Itsuki is the first one he runs into, and all of them are shocked to some extent, except Miku, who almost certainly planned it. But Maruo is not happy about his happenstance and is very adamant that Fuutarou keep his distance. This puts Fuutarou on the spot. Just a few pages ago he was dwelling on how he doesn't know how to talk to Nino, and now he is once again forced to interact with them while also dealing with their father, who still very much hates him. He notes that all of them seem off and are strangely avoiding him. All except Nino, but he knows exactly what's going on with her, even if he can't for the life of him figure out why. Before Fuutarou can ask Itsuki, Maruo steps in, and when Isanari shows up with Raiha, Maruo swiftly comes up with an excuse to separate the two families. It is worth noting that Nino notes Isanari's resemblance to Fuutarou. After all, she did state earlier that she has a thing for blondes. And this is the first time most of them have seen his father, further highlighting the fact that Itsuki is the only one who has been in his house. When Fuutarou tries to meet up with Itsuki, he realizes he never got to charge his phone and ends up flying blind into several of the girls in their Itsuki costumes without realizing that none of them are the real one. The real one is waiting for him elsewhere, in a place he never shows up because he's chasing all the other Itsukis. He manages to get a message telling him to meet her in the courtyard. This is when he first runs into the fake Itsuki, who states that she wishes to end their current relationship. At face value, it sounds like she no longer accepts him as a tutor, which understandably freaks him out. He shoves Miku, causing her to hit her thigh hard enough to leave a bruise, and then gets slammed by their grandfather. After that terrifying experience, he tries chasing the girl down, only to get blocked by their father. The next day, his apathy takes hold until Itsuki calls Raiha. They manage to sneak away from their respective families by going to the bathhouse. Fuutarou is very nonplussed by Nino storming into the bathhouse. He manages to piss her off enough to leave by asking her who she is, which, given the context, he probably should have figured it out, especially when she asked to wash his back. And with that hair, it could only be Nino or Yotsuba. But he also doesn't have a whole lot of time to think, and I imagine other things are going on with his body that are keeping him from evaluating the situation. Fuutarou was genuine about not telling them apart and once again dismisses the love thing. Itsuki's plight does bring him back to basics. He is once again helping them with personal issues before it can negatively affect their grades. But on that note, he is far more concerned about the fake Itsuki. And though he hasn't really put it together, he will have to solve that puzzle in order to solve the larger puzzle in front of Itsuki. It's more important to him, but only a fifth of the total picture. He does start to realize that when Itsuki declares him as a friend. After that, he calms down and listens to her. After the gag with Itsuki walking in on him with a towel, he initiates a plan that'll help them both. Itsuki distracts their father while Fuutarou goes into their room. There he comes face to faces with 4 more Itsukis. Now, this is really hard to tell in the manga, but with the anime, I'm pretty sure it goes Ichika, Miku, Yotsuba, Nino. Yotsuba is the easiest one to tell because she's always standing and leaning. Miku is usually the one with the smallest mouth. Ichika and Nino are the only ones I had no direct visual clues, but this one's hands are visible, and don't have nail polish, and Nino never removing her nail polish becomes a whole plot point later. That doesn't matter, I just wanted to flex my own love for the series and for Neji's draftsmanship by pointing out the very little details you can use to tell them apart. Fuutarou interviews them one by one, and aside from the fourth one who ends up giving herself away, you can't really tell which is which. The anime doesn't help much because the actresses are just really good at their job. I was barely able to pick out Kana Hanazawa as the first Itsuki.
自己紹介ですね。中野いつき。まあ、そんな私も大人になったってことで。
And so I assumed they went in numerical order. The dub voices were easier to pick out and confirmed this hypothesis. With that, it's interesting to note that Nino is the second Itsuki and immediately zeroes in on their shared interest in food. And Miku, the third Itsuki, gets the most defensive because she's the fake Itsuki Fuutarou is looking for. Yotsuba gives herself up after a few leading questions and then admits that this whole charade is what's been bothering her. That makes two that Fuutarou has figured out completely, thus ruling her out as the fake Itsuki. Before he can try finishing the quintuplet game, he loses track of which one was Yotsuba and then ducks under the table as their grandfather comes in. While under there, he looks at all their thighs and sees if one of them has a bruise on it, surmising that the one who does is the fake Itsuki. He succeeds in finding the bruise, but not the identity of the one with it. The girls all leave, making it easier for Fuutarou to slip out, and he is then confronted by Miku. He tries forcing himself to find the answer, and carefully observes every minute detail of her movement, which is actually tantamount to love, and this specific bit of observation allows him to succeed in the end. He also contemplates what could be bothering her. He suspects that it has to do with the Valentine's Day chocolates she gave him. He never got anything for her in return, but he's doubtful that would be enough for her to break off their relationship. I also find it funny that their grandpa comes up and basically tells Fuutarou right then and there that Miku is the fake Itsuki, but he totally misses it. He uses granddaughter singularly, meaning that this would be the second time he's seen Fuutarou put his hands on this one specifically. But Fuutarou hasn't been looking at them as individuals, and so he completely misses it and thinks he meant granddaughter collectively. Either that or he is completely taken aback by the old man's ability to know it's Miku without even giving her a close look. And it's here that Fuutarou switches focus and starts kissing up to the old man so that he can learn the best way to solve this issue. Problem being that the answer has been in front of him the entire time. He goes fishing with the old man and watches the girls along the beach. Nino and Ichika arrive after their bath time, and even from a distance the old man is able to pick them out. He is also able to name the various fish he catches, showing that he loves fish, hinting that, like the fish, each of the girls has little details that make them distinct. One of them falls in the water, and after revealing she hurt her leg earlier, Fuutarou drags her away, believing that she is the fake he's been looking for. When someone starts approaching, he is then thrown in the water. He continues to spend time with the grandfather and realizes that the entire notion of love being the key was his idea. But unlike the girls, he has the wisdom and intelligence to expand on that idea. Dedicating time, dedicating effort, hearing them instead of just listening, observing instead of just seeing. This is tantamount to love. And the old man then asks the all-too-important question, why? This isn't just some test. What does he hope to accomplish by telling them apart? And can he truly face the girls in good faith and give them the answers they desire? Itsuki sets up one last test between Fuutarou and the fake Itsuki. He uses everything he's learned about the girls along with Itsuki's request to start deducing her identity. He instantly rolls out Yotsuba since he knows what her issue was and also knows she wouldn't be able to pull off a perfect disguise. He then rolls out Nino since the fake Itsuki doesn't have any of Nino's polish or any other evidence of a pedicure. The fact he rolls out Nino and gets all flustered about knowing what was bothering her throws the fake Itsuki off, and that's something for future arcs to get into. He spouts off the code word Demiglace just to see her reaction. He had to be extra sure that this wasn't just the real Itsuki putting on an elaborate con. After rolling out those possibilities, it comes down to Ichika and Miku, the two he hadn't been able to figure out yet. He had been suspecting the reason Miku is acting strange since before the trip even started, but thinks it's just too petty. Little does he know that nothing is too petty for a teenage girl in love. He tries getting her to slip up, but she's too good for that. Miku has always been the best at impersonating the Quints, but as an actress, Ichika would be just as capable. She seemingly slips with one of Ichika's verbal tics, convincing him that fake Itsuki was Ichika all along. Even though his suspicions are all but confirmed, he's still not satisfied. He laments having to resort to cheap tricks as the old man's wisdom repeats in his head. And then he sees it, an unconscious habit of frustration from the fake Itsuki. He had seen that exact same twitch before. He had seen Miku walk that exact same way and make the exact same subtle gesture when he was examining her earlier in the arc. Knowing one's habits is tantamount for love, so he calls out to her by name. He admits that one of the things throwing him off was that he thought she was only mad that he never gave her chocolates for Valentine's Day, after she put in so much work to give him some. I love this page in the final chapter where all the rivalries are heating up just as the spa gets hotter and Raiha says, "I hope Big Bro doesn't die of a heat stroke," as if the thing that's actually going to be the death of him is the sibling rivalry. He's having one last bath with Maruo and Isanari, where we see a bit of the father's relationship and the first mention that Maruo only drinks on special occasions. Isanari plays an interesting part of this chapter by sharing gossip we hadn't been privy to. As I stated earlier in the video, Miku somehow rigged this. There were only 5 winners overall and 4 winning groups before either group arrived. Maruo notes that this is suspicious, but for Fuutarou the truth begins to click. The resort that just happens to be where their grandfather lives. Miku going out of her way to enter this raffle right as Fuutarou is in that same store. The wrong address getting Maruo involved. The need for disguises for their grandfather's benefit. Either Miku planned all of it and everything went exactly as she planned, or their grandfather fabricated tickets to get all of them together, possibly conspiring with Miku. I'm not actually sure. So much in this arc implies that Miku had some hand in making this happen, but it's also likely their grandfather only forged the Nakano's tickets so he could spend more time with them, and Fuutarou getting involved was just a happy coincidence. He concludes that the old man's days are numbered and he did this in order to spend more time with his granddaughters. So Fuutarou thanks him for everything he's done, for caring about them, and for allowing him to make more memories himself. After showing his gratitude, this old man tasks Fuutarou with his greatest challenge yet. In this task, he reveals the truth to Fuutarou that he really should have been able to figure out for himself. Rena, the girl who confronted him, is one of the Quints. He did meet at least one of them in Kyoto 5 years ago. He still has a lot to learn about them, but he's helped them come this far. And now that he has begun to understand their feelings, he can help them find themselves. And in time, they'll overcome their grandfather's death, just as they did their mother. And unlike when Rena Nakano passed away, Fuutarou will be there for them when that time comes. He pledges to return again and make more memories for the old man, and when he does, he'll be able to tell their faces apart. This is briefly paid off in the flash forward when we see the picture of the girls as adults, standing with their grandfather looking happier than he ever does in this arc. Before he leaves, he congratulates himself on a job well done. He's beginning to understand what love means and how much deeper it is than just childish infatuation. And just when he is more confident than ever before, one of the girls throws one last curveball at him. As I stated before, this arc is the second and final individual arc that calls back to the wedding, which, reminder, also serves as the framing device for the entire series. Within the first page, we see Fuutarou and the bride standing at the altar. This is picking up right where the flash forward at the end of the bonfire arc left off. The vows have been said and they are getting ready to kiss. The bride teases him about his nervousness and reminds him that this isn't the first time. Through this framing device, we are promised that by the end of this arc, one of the girls will kiss Fuutarou, and that whoever does is almost certainly the bride. At the beginning of chapter 62, we hear the legend of the bell. Any couple that kisses under it while it's ringing will be bound for eternity. Fuutarou even notes how similar this is to the legend of the bonfire, a legend he doesn't know was fulfilled by the Quints while he was sleeping. So, let's talk about Dune. Trust me, I'm going somewhere with this. Mild spoilers for the book, but by far my favorite thing about that series is how it ponders the idea of a chosen one. If a group makes a phony prophecy just to manipulate people's hope, and then someone goes and fulfills that prophecy, is it still a phony prophecy? I bring this up because both in The Legend of the Bonfire and Scrambled Eggs, there is a legend that may or may not be phony, but is ultimately fulfilled. But it's not fulfilled because of chance, it's fulfilled because of the actions of Fuutarou and the girls. All the girls are superstitious, so they wholeheartedly believe in these legends. But it's not necessarily the legend that makes their wishes come true, it's their wishes and the hope that brings, and the effort that makes that legend come true. It's kinda crazy that Dune and Quintessential Quintuplets have this in common, and I can't really think of another series that contemplates fate in this way. Throughout chapter 68, we get more glimpses of the wedding. We see the bride say "I do" and the exchanging of rings, but Fuutarou somehow misplaced the ring sometime after Raiha gave it to him during the Bonfire arc's flash forward. Which must be really embarrassing, but it does set up the final quintuplet game, as does the absence of any other Nakano in these flash forwards. Though that has the added effect of contributing to the mystery. Everyone in these flash forwards knows what the audience doesn't. Raiha seems to be the only one that is worried about this lack of decor, which makes me think the Quints purposely took it for the sole purpose of doing their quintuplet game, and seeing how the manga ends, Fuutarou most likely suspected as much anyway. But the veil is pulled off the bride for one final kiss. Raiha thinks back to the final moments of their hot spring trip, which directly implies that Yotsuba, Nino, or Itsuki are the bride, since it flashes to a scene with the four of them, with added emphasis on Yotsuba since she's the one Raiha is talking to on this page. The bell kisser does her thing and Fuutarou is unable to tell who it is, and it really could be any of them. It could be Ichika making her first strike only to feel guilty for doing this as Itsuki. It could be Nino executing her original plan only to be disappointed that Fuutarou still wasn't able to tell who she is. It could be Miku riding the high of her victory only to realize Fuutarou isn't actually on that level yet. It could be Itsuki throwing her hat into the ring now that she knows more than one sister has the hots for him. But it's actually Yotsuba, having one last fleeting moment of expression before she is forced back into her supporting role and made to watch as everyone else fights over him. This concludes part 8 of my quintessential breakdown of Quintessential Quintuplets.